This is the SOP video for installing Bluebird day gear smile plates on 3-pin boots. Our list of tools and supplies we're going to need are first and foremost eye protection. I like to use safety gloves, work gloves, because the boots do get kind of hot during the procedure. And then we're going to need a ink pen, center punch or a sharp screwdriver, X-Acto knife or razor blade, flashlight, 2 clamps. We have some scrap wood for clamping the boots to the bench. We'll see how we use these later, but these are, it looks like this one's about a 1/2 inch thick. We need our boots, our smile plates and included screws. We need a small Phillips head screwdriver. We need a Dremel, and we're going to need the Dremel or other rotary tool. We're going to need the burr bit on it. Burr bit, and we also need a couple of grinding bits. We need one with a kind of a finer point grinding bit, and then one that's a little bit broader as well. And then we need either a number 44 drill bit. In a pinch, a 5/64 work just as well. And on these drill bits, we have marked a 1/2 inch depth with a piece of tape. So go ahead and measure that with a ruler, mark that with a piece of tape. So we have number 44 or a 5/64, both would work. And we have a 1/16 inch drill bit, also marked with the same 1/2 inch depth. We're going to need our epoxy, a place to mix the epoxy and apply the epoxy, and a drill. Now, optional is an air compressor, just to clear the workspace while you're working on it, but at home, not totally necessary. You could always just blow it off. All right, so the first step is, let's take a look at our boots here. So we see there, maybe missed the 3 pins a few times there, stretched out the holes a little bit. So this is a prime example of what the smile plates were kind of intended for. For these boots that are kind of on their way to being borderline unusable, we want to stop that before we get there. So let's take our smile plates out of the packaging, and I'm going to start by taking the smile plate, and there are these dimples on the smile plate. For now, later these are going to be face down into the boot sole, but for now I'm going to leave them facing up. And these the holes without the dimples, just the 3-pin holes, I'm going to take those 3-pin holes and line them up with the 3-pin holes on the boot. All right. And this is the time where you definitely want to measure twice, cut once. So now once those are lined up with the 3-pin holes, we're going to take our center punch, and now we're going to mark the holes that we're going to drill. So we're going to mark the 4 dimpled holes, not the 3-pin holes. So once they're lined up, we're going to go ahead and mark those 4 dimple holes, the center punch, making sure to keep a good amount of pressure on the plate with your thumb as you do this so it doesn't shift. Good. Good. All right. Now I'm just going to eyeball it and make sure that all these look center and remark any that may need to be remarked, because again, you don't want to measure twice, cut once here. All right. Sometimes if the center punch doesn't work, if some stiffnesses of boot soles are stiffer than others, so if the center punch doesn't work, you can always take a fine point screwdriver or something of the like and just ream it a little bit. Really make sure you know where that mark is. All right, that looks good. And now with all those lined up and with the holes I've just marked lined up, I'm going to go ahead and take my ballpoint pen and I'm going to trace the shape of the smile plate onto the bottom of the boot. Beautiful. All right, so now, as you can see, we have marked where the holes will be drilled, and we've also traced the shape of the smile plate onto the bottom of the boot. So, the next step is to take our razor blade, our X-Acto knife, and we're going to carefully score the boot right along that line in pen that we just traced onto it. So this is going to help when we're dremeling out a channel. It's going to help create a nice clean line for us. And also, when you score it with the razor blade, it can't wash off like a pen can. So all right. So as you can see, we've gone ahead and scored it so that that shape of the smile plate is a little bit more evident on there. So now when we're working the boot and we're going to drill it and stuff, even if you wipe the pen off while you're drilling it, you're still going to be able to see where you are because you just marked it with a razor blade. So the next step, now that the holes are all marked, is going to be to clamp the boot to the bench to prepare us for drilling. Now, to clamp the boot to the bench, I've been using these two pieces of plywood and these two clamps like so. So we'll have about a half-inch piece of plywood sitting up here on the bench. And then I'll take my boot upside down and kind of take this piece of plywood, push it right up against that the front of that boot sole. I'll take our second piece of plywood and I'll lay it over just enough so that it's touching the boot, so that it's sitting on top of the boot sole, but not so much that it's covering the line that we just scored with our razor blade, because I still want to be able to work on that smile plate hole. And then we'll take our clamps, Alright, so now that our boot's all on the clamp, So I'll clamp down to the bench. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just use a rubber band, and I'm going to fix our flashlight to this clamp, just because when you're dremeling the channel into the boot and it's all black on black, it can be a little bit hard to figure depth with the shadows and stuff like that. So this is just going to, help us get closer to that goal of, measure twice, cut once here, right? A little more time spent on your boots is going to be a lot cheaper than having to buy a whole new pair. So we can see that a whole lot better now. There we are. All right. So now I'm going to start with my outer holes, the outer two holes here. So the outer two holes require a 1/16 inch drill bit. Again, we've gone and we've marked our depth on the drill bit to a 1/2 inch using a piece of tape. And this part is especially important. You really want to make sure that the drill is straight vertical. If it's slightly off center, the screws will go in crooked later and it won't be very secure. So I'm going to find those marks that we've made with our punch. Make sure that the clamps aren't interfering with our ability to get perfectly vertical. This one seems to be a little bit, so I'm going to move it out just a little bit. All right, much better. All right, now let's find that mark we've marked with our punch. Very carefully seat that bit on it. Make sure it's perfectly vertical. And when you're drilling this, it's critical that once you hit that collar we've made out of tape to mark a 1/2 inch, it's really critical that you're not applying too much pressure. Otherwise, the tape will just slide up the drill bit. Let's go ahead and drill that. All right, let's do the other outer hole with the 1/16 inch drill bit. All right, so we've got the outer holes all drilled. Now let's go ahead and let's do the inner holes. The inner holes inner two holes are going to require either a number 44 or a 5/64 drill bit. All right, so here we have our number 44 drill bit, marked to a 1/2 inch in depth. I'm going to clear this up just a little bit with my compressor so I can see where I'm drilling. Now usually with these center two holes, you're going to be drilling through some metal reinforcements in the boot. So again, take great care that once you do get all the way through that metal reinforcement, that the drill tends to want to jump through way deeper. And again, once you hit that tape, if you push too hard on the tape, it's just going to push the tape up the drill bit and drill a deeper hole. So we want to be really careful with the amount of pressure we're applying here. go. You see we just broke through that metal. There we go. Also, make a note that if you have access to a drill press is also a great tool to use for drilling the holes. It kind of takes an element of potential error out of the process of making sure they're perfectly straight. So if you do have a drill press, clamp them to the table the same way as you clamp them to the bench. And we kind of loosened up some of our adjustments here so that we can kind of get crafty with how we go about turning that boot so that we can get those holes lined up with the bit here. So usually if I was setting up the drill press, I would like to clamp the boot down to the table before I put the bit in. And then essentially once that's all clamped down to the table, everything's loosened a little bit, I will then put the bit in last, because then you avoid running the risk of running this into the drill bit, because with these small drill bits, it'll just snap the drill bit right in half. So I'll take my drill press table and I'll raise it up just enough so that there's some clearance between the tallest point on the clamp and the drill bit, just to avoid accidentally running into it while I'm spinning the table. And then you would simply make sure that it's lined right up with the hole. Go ahead and carefully drill that. All right. All right, so now that our holes are all drilled in the boot and we've scored the shape of the smile plate with our razor earlier, we're going to go ahead and use our Dremel with our rotary burr bit there. I find these bits are real nice for chipping away at this rubber. They tend not to wander too bad. So we're going to take this and we're going to carve a channel just about as thick as the smile plate, so that it sits nice and flush with the boot sole when we install it. So let's go ahead and get dremeling. When you're dremeling, be careful. The boot and the bit especially do get super hot. Double check, make sure you're wearing your safety glasses during this process as well. So how I usually do this is I start by just tracing an outline, just to get a nice clean line around the edges, and then I'll kind of go in and take away the stuff from the middle. The air compressor is really helpful during this process for exactly this reason. It gets kind of ambiguous to see the line at times, so go ahead and there we go. You can see the line a lot more clearly. So what I'm trying to do here is to, before I start taking away all that much out of the middle, I'm going to try and get this groove that is the shape of the outline here just about as deep as I want the recess to be. And then I'm going to go in the middle and I'm going to fill in the gaps. This way it's a lot easier to see how deep the channel is that you're carving when you have a full height edge on either side of it. All right. So now that I have made a groove that's, probably about a millimeter or two deep into that outer outline, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take some out of the middle, kind of even that out. With this step, it's always best not to really be holding the Dremel in one place for too long, because with such a small bit here, the advantage of using this small spherical bit is you get to use it at any angle. So you can almost kind of scribble it like a pencil. If you do hold it in one place, it will just make a rut in the shape of a ball, and it'll kind of be hard to even out later. All right. To emphasize the importance of the good old measure twice, cut once, we're going to make sure that we're going to see if, before we keep going, we're going to see if this sits flush. So to check for, to see if our Dremel channel is deep enough here, we're still going to place it in there with the dimple side facing upwards out of the boot sole towards you, because we're going to countersink for these dimples later and wouldn't be able to accurately measure depth. So we're just trying to get the thickness of that plate there. So let's put it up. Let's see. All right. So as you can see, we do still need a little bit more width taken off of this channel so that the plate fits. So before we go deeper, let's start by taking off that width. Looks like it might just need a hair more of dremeling on the front side here. All right, let's go ahead and do another fitment check before we go any further. See if we got it for real this time. All right, we're going to put the dimples again, dimples facing up towards you for this step of just making sure that our channel's deep enough. That looks golden. So what we're looking for here is that when you put it in here and apply some pressure, you want the edge of that smile plate to be roughly flush with the boot. And it looks like we're getting that. There we are. Our next step here is going to be countersinking the holes that we've drilled in our boot, just so that there's enough space for the boot to accept these dimples in the smile plate going into the sole, and the rest of the plate sitting flush against the boot while that occurs. If we were to try and put this smile plate into the boot right now with the dimples facing into the sole here, it would kind of rock back and forth on it a little bit, like that. So we're trying to get a nice flush fit. So we're just going to create a little bit of space for these there. Yeah. All right, so since this boot does still have a little bit of rubber remaining for us to work with, we're just going to go in super carefully with our burr bit around those holes. And I really want to emphasize how slow to work on this step. You don't want to take off too much here. Alright, so we finished dremeling these countersunk holes. We've countersunk them in the shape of a cone to accept the dimples in the smile plate. So now these will sit flush into the boot. So to double check that, we're going to put this dimple side into the boot sole, opposite of what we've been doing. Now we've carved those channels for those to fit. We're going to apply some light pressure here. We're going to see how it sits once in that recess. All right. All right, now I'd say we've gotten rid of about 90% of that fore and aft movement there caused by those dimples sitting up on the rubber. And now just to double check, once we put the screws in there, the dimples are going to essentially accept that last 10% of downward pressure we need for a fully flush fit. Now this is good because we do still have a little bit of rubber left to work with on these boots. If we didn't have rubber to work with, if the boot soles were more worn and there wasn't as much flex still going on in the sole, we would have to carve those countersunk holes a little bit deeper. But since we do still have some rubber to work with, I think we'll call it good there. And now we'll double check the general depth by having the dimples facing upwards towards you. The general depth of the channel, again, I'd say that looks pretty flush. So, theoretically, it should sit flush with our countersunk holes when we place dimples down now, once we have those screws tightened in there. So, for this step of the process, since having the boot in the clamping mechanism that we were just using does kind of stretch the sole out a little bit, I'm just going to take the this little rod sticking out of my clamp, and I'm just going to stick the boot onto it. It makes it a little bit easier to work with like this than just holding it on the bench and kind of fumbling it around, so you can use both your hands. So our next step, before we actually get to any epoxy or anything like that, is going to be taking our isopropyl alcohol, piece of a paper towel or something, or a shop rag or something, and we're going to clean all of the dust and grime off of this surface so that it is primed to accept some epoxy. All right. Kind of blow it off. Now we're going to wait for that alcohol to dry. In the meantime, we can make sure that we have all of our screws. Now the screws in the package, in the smile plate package, are going to be enclosed in masking tape here. So as you can see, these screws that are under the blue masking tape are going to be these inner two holes, and the screws in the white masking tape are going to be outer two holes. So I'm going to double check, make sure we've got enough of each. All right, good. So now I'm going to take, I like to use, we're going to take our epoxy. I like to use slow set epoxy. The slow set just gives me a little bit more time to work with before it hardens in case I come across any sort of issue in the process. So I just like to get a scrap piece of cardboard or something. And then to stir the epoxy, I like to use Q-tip that's cut in half, and I use this middle side. This way I don't get any cotton or debris into the epoxy. So you're going to want to use epoxy that is designed to handle cold conditions. If epoxy wasn't designed for such, it can get really brittle in snow settings. So a good negative 30 degrees Celsius, negative 30 degree epoxy, marine epoxy, all great stuff. So this is a two-part epoxy. So for one boot, I like to get right about, if I was doing both boots, I would do about a dime size glob of each of the two parts of epoxy. Right now, since I'm just demonstrating for this boot, I'll make both part A and part B of the epoxy about the size of a dime. And have equal parts in the two-part epoxy. Okay. All right. So as you can see, we've got equal parts. Part A and part B about the size of a dime. We're going to stir that up thoroughly until fully incorporated. All right, once that's fully incorporated, we're going to take, small amounts at a time here if you want it to be clean. So I'm just going to take my Q-tip there and just get about barely the tip of it covered in epoxy. And then we're going to carefully put some globs of epoxy right over those holes that we just drilled and countersunk. Taking great care not to actually put it into the 3-pin holes. All right, now that I've got the epoxy into those holes, I'm just going to take tiny amounts of epoxy kind of around these spaces here around the holes, just to try and get the best adhesion of the plate to the boot as possible. Kind of smooth out any, account for any imperfections in our non-perfectly flat surface that we've just dremeled. It'll fill in any gaps for us. No need to go overboard with it. Just enough so you can see a little bit of shine on the surface from the epoxy. All right. So we've got epoxy in our 4 holes there. Now we're going to double check and we're going to make sure that we have our screws and our small Phillips head screwdriver. So we're going to take our smile plate. Let's see. we'll do an inner screw first. Now, an important part of this process here of screwing them in is not to torque the screws down all the way until all four are seated into their holes. So we're going to carefully set this down. Try not to let it move around too much once it's seated. Otherwise, you'll kind of get epoxy everywhere and be a big mess. Try and set my screw down there. Steady hands. All right. No need to apply too much pressure here. It's a very delicate process. You want to be super careful here because if you strip one of these screws, and they are quite small, it can be somewhat of a mess, difficult to deal with. So we're going to stop short of having that all the way torqued. We're going to get our other screws seated. Let's do, while we're at it, we'll just do the other inner screw. Again, very light pressure here because we do already have a pilot hole, so no need to force it. Really just make sure you're getting that threaded nice and straight. Take your time here. Kind of holding that plate with your other thumb so that it doesn't slide around too much and get epoxy everywhere. All right, then we're going to move on to our outer screws. Again, really light pressure. Just allow the threads to seat themselves. You'll feel it. All right, stopping short of having it all the way torqued down before we get until we get all four seated. Let's get the final screw in there. All right, now that all four screws are seated, I'm going to just incrementally tighten opposing screws. So now that I'm on this outer screw, I'm going to go ahead and go to this outer screw, give it just a couple of turns until I see the plate move a little bit. All right, cool. Now I'm going to go to one of the inner screws, give it a couple turns. I'm going to go to the other opposite inner screw, give it a couple turns, and then rinse and repeat. I'm going to go again to that outer screw that we started on. There we are. A little tighter. Let's 2 turns. Tighter there. Back to the inner screws. Now we're probably good to tighten it to its final torque. And now I can't emphasize enough, you want to be really light when you're giving it this final torque here. Otherwise you will just snap the heads of the screws clean off. So really you just want to use a couple of fingers in your forearm. You don't want to use your shoulder or your whole arm or lean onto it or anything crazy. And once you feel it stop with, just like a couple fingers here on the screwdriver, that's pretty much all you need. So let's go ahead and move on to that opposite inner screw. All right, see what I mean? Nice and delicate with it. All right. So now I'm going to take my rag and wipe off the excess epoxy. Nice. All right. Do this last one a little bit more. All right. That looks golden. All right. And now if any epoxy did bleed into the 3-pin holes, that's okay. Because at this step of the game when it's still wet, all you do is take a Q-tip, shove it into the 3-pin hole, ream it out. That's all there is to it. So as you can see, we got a nice flush fit. And it lines up with the 3-pin holes such that it will still accept it. Everything's aligned all nice. We worked slow, measured twice, cut once, and looks good. This has been the SOP video for smile plate installation.